Just to say a little bit about Miriam, and no better place than the Uniting Women website, which has a good succinct summary. Miriam has a passion for exploring what it means to live faithfully in the context of our changing awareness of our place in creation. She attends the South Sydney Uniting Church and works part-time as the Uniting Earth Ministry consultant with the Uniting Church New South Wales ACT Synod. She is also a researcher with National Church Life Survey and a fellow of Australian Catholic University. Miriam, as part of Uniting Earthweb, is involved in the Faith Ecology Network and is on the management committee of the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change, or ARC. But today the focus is on the findings and implications of the National Church Life Survey as it relates to ecological matters. And so, Miriam, it's over to you to make your presentation, and hopefully along the way there'll be opportunity for questions and discussion.
Whoa, can't hear us. We better say, can't hear.
Sorry, unmuted myself. Can I just ask how many people are there in the room there in Brisbane?
How many people?
About 15.
Yeah, about
15. Okay, great. All right. And so we want to go through till about 2:30 with this session?
Yes, about that.
About that? Okay. I'm not going to talk that whole time. I will aim to talk for about 20 minutes. May go a little bit longer than that, and then time for discussion after that. Okay, and can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thanks very much. All right. So I'm going to talk about National Church Life Survey findings about eco-theological engagement in the Australian Church today. And I'm going to be talking about findings from the 2011 National Church Life Survey. So first, I'm going to talk about the NCLS and why we've conducted this research. Then I want to look at the results for the environmental activities in local churches, the actions that leaders and churchgoers are taking part in, and then want to also look at leaders and churchgoers' views and eco-theological beliefs as well, and draw out some implications for people like you and me in another capacity that are involved in this kind of work in the churches. Okay, so the 2011 National Church Life Survey, and that was the latest round of what is a 20-year project, the NCLS. It involved 23 Christian denominations, over 3,000 local churches, over 250,000 churchgoers, and a couple of thousand church leaders. And in blue there, they're samples, if you like, of those that we're going to be looking at. So it's a small sample of our 260,000 churchgoers that the results draw from, and a sample of our church leaders and most of our local churches as well. So that's the NCLS has a church health and vitality research agenda as its main agenda, but also a whole range of other research interests are progressed through the National Church Life Survey, and the environment is one of those. So that's what we'll be drawing on today. Okay, so the purpose of the environmental research in the NCLS is to map environmental views and actions among churches, among clergy, and among people in the pews, to understand what influences these views and actions, and very importantly, to provide environmental advocates in churches like yourselves with data to support your very important work, and also to contribute to the academic literature. So we're doing that as well at NCLS. Okay, this is a slide with a fair bit of information on it, but what it shows here is what churches told us in 2011 about the activities that they are involved in. So the blue bars that you can see here are the environmental actions that people said they had undertaken in the past 5 years at their church. The red bars are changes that had been made to church buildings in the past 5 years, and the green bars are actions that usually happen at that particular church. So this was a list of activities and people could select which ones they were doing. So at the top of the list there you have recycling in the green bar with most churches, about 2/3 of churches. Then about 1/3 of churches we have purchasing environmentally friendly consumables. And then just below that we have energy saving, so implementation of energy saving measures at the buildings of the church. And then also celebration of a day or season with an environmental theme. And that was, for example, World Environment Day or Season of Creation or Environment Sunday. And on par with that as well is about 1/4 of churches, 27% of local churches, said that they usually included environmental concerns in their worship, for example, through prayer, through sermons, also through hymns and songs, and so forth. Water saving measures at their church is just below that as well. What doesn't figure very highly down the bottom is taking action to conserve biodiversity, switching to green power, and public environmental events. So that gives you a sense of the range of activities that are going on in churches, which ones are more frequent, which ones less so, which ones are less common. One that I would probably point out is Bible study on an environmental theme. So only just 1 in 10 churches, 11% of churches said that they had done that in the last 5 years, and 14% of churches said that they had run a kids activity on an environmental theme. So we're talking here about 23 Christian denominations, Catholic, Anglican, variety of Protestant denominations as well. So it's a very broad spread of purpose here. And I know a lot of us, do work in this area of preparing resources. So it's interesting to get a sense of what's actually going on out there in terms of Bible studies and kids activities and so on, as well as some of the more practically focused stuff. Okay, so how does this vary by denomination then? Okay, there were 21 activities that we asked about, and that graph that you can see up the top there, it says what was the average number of those 21 activities that were selected in each of the displayed denominations. So uniting churches, 4 out of 21 activities on average. Catholic and Anglican churches, 3. Baptist churches of Christ and Lutheran churches, and a range of small Protestant denominations, 2 activities, and Pentecostal churches, just 1 of 21 activities. And in the table below it, you can see the sort of spread across different sorts of activities. So the first one, which is celebrate a day or season with an environmental theme in the last 5 years. So that goes from 4% of Pentecostal churches had done that to just under half of uniting churches had done that. Other activities we don't see as much variation. So I mentioned before, Bible studies, not very common. Well, they're not very common across all the denominations. What about locality? So is church-based environmental engagement happening more in the cities, for example? And this chart shows that, yes, it is. So in the centre of our capital cities, an average of 4 out of 21 of those possible activities. 3 activities in the suburbs of capital cities and in large rural centres, 2 in small rural towns, rural service centres and regional centres, and 1 activity in small rural areas. So again, in the table below it, you can see how that varies for different sorts of activities. The one down the bottom, which is, did your church contact an elected government representative on an environmental issue in the last 5 years? I actually see it's the large rural centres where that happened. I've got some thoughts about what that could be about. So, it could be in relation to issues to do with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan or mining or a variety of other issues. But that's just to say it isn't only the city churches that are environmentally active, but activity does tend to be concentrated there. Okay, moving then on to church leaders and what are church leaders doing. So look first at the frequency of preaching about the environment. So you see in these charts, we talk about senior leaders here. What this is referring to is basically clergy who are in placement in a congregation, you might say. So, and if there's several clergy, then it's the most senior of those people. So we have over a half of our senior clergy in congregations and parishes are preaching on the environment at least occasionally, so over half. And under half do it rarely or never. And then when we look at some other actions in the top chart there, we see that some clergy are collaborating with other clergy on environment issues, collaborating with environmental groups, and are themselves members of environmental groups as well. Small numbers, but still, you know, a number of clergy are actually doing that. We're going to look then at how preaching about the environment varies by denomination again. So this is the percentage of clergy and congregations that are preaching at least occasionally about environmental issues or in connection with environmental issues. So again, we see fairly high levels in the Uniting Church, Catholic Church, Anglican Church, down to Lutheran, then Baptist Churches of Christ and small Protestant churches, and yeah, lowest again there, Pentecostal clergy. So again, quite a big variation across the denomination in terms of clergy engagement with these issues. Okay, what about church attenders' environmental activities? So we asked churchgoers about a range of consumer or household actions, and we also asked them about civic type actions. So the blue ones are the consumer actions about saving water and energy in the home, for example, and the pink ones are about civic actions such as participating in an environmental event like Earth Hour, participating in a conservation activity such as land care or bush regeneration, contacting a parliamentarian, participation in a protest, membership of an environmental group. So this is to say that consumer behaviours are more common. So we asked them, which of these have you done to reduce your impact on the environment, of the consumer behaviours? And of the civic behaviours, we asked them, have you done any of these things in the last 5 years? So again, higher levels of consumer behaviours, lower levels of civic behaviours. That's typical. It's typical for a broader public sample as well. So CSIRO in the same year, 2011, asked the general public similar questions to these, and the comparison here is what I'm showing you. So the incidence of these types of behaviours among churchgoers was similar to the broader Australian public, similar or less, similar or slightly less, except for the ones that I've circled. So the ones that are in red, we have higher levels of self-reported behaviour in the household sphere than we do among the general public. Now the wording of the question was slightly different in our case than it was in CSIRO's case, and that could be something to do with it, but there are other explanations such as, you know, churchgoers are older on average than the broader Australian population. There's probably more of a frugality ethic in church-going circles, so these behaviours that are about resource saving are more highly reported among churchgoers. So that's consistent with that idea of a more frugal concern, less of an inclination to be wasteful and to be concerned about being wasteful. We asked this very important question of church attenders. We asked, which is the closest to your view regarding the church's role in caring for the earth? So just under a fifth said that caring for the earth is an essential part of the mission of the church in their view. About a third said that caring for the earth is part of the mission of the church, but there are higher mission priorities. Another third said that caring for the earth is a responsibility of the church, but it's not mission. And then a small proportion said it's not a priority, and a small proportion also said don't know. So on the whole, there's pretty high support for ecological engagement, creation care, and so on in a church context, but less than a fifth see that as central to what the church is about. We asked another question, which is, do you believe that Christians have a responsibility to be active about environmental issues? And 80% of church people agreed. So again, when you look at it at that level, there is support for the kind of engagement work that we do, although the question is, of course, how deep is that support? So it's important then to look at issues in context. So that's what this chart shows you. We asked church attenders to indicate on which public issues should your denomination be most active in your view, and they could select 4 from that list of issues that I'm showing you there. So you can see that environment occurs a long way down the list. So 12% of people chose that as one of their 4 top issues. So, you know, the most commonly chosen issues were to do with marriage and the family, issues around poverty in Australia particularly, issues around drugs, bioethical issues, and also poverty overseas, engagement with issues of poverty internationally. So again, there is support for creation care and so on in our churches, but when you look at it, there are other public issues that people think are more important on the whole. So that's sobering and important, again, to always look at things in context. It's worth noting too that when questions are asked of the broader Australian population about their concern about public issues, you get a similar kind of response. Environment is generally not up the top of the issues of concern, but it changes over time depending on what's on the public agenda. But yes, generally a similar pattern to what we see here with church people. Okay. Climate change. So we asked people about their views about climate change. You know, obviously very important. Many of us are working on that these days. So I thought I'd show you these couple of results here too. So we asked them, you know, which of the following is closest to your thoughts about climate change? Climate change is not happening. 8% of attenders thought that. I don't know if it's happening. 10%. Climate change is happening, but it's a natural cause. 38%. Climate change is happening, but it's human caused. Again, CSIRO asked the same question of a broader Australian population, also in 2011, and got fairly similar results to what we got from our churchgoers. So no huge differences there. But what we did see differences between church people and the broader Australian population was around a sense of moral duty to do something about climate change. So that's the chart that you can see there on your left. So we have 40% saying they agree that they felt a moral duty, and 13% of people strongly agreed with that. So that's a stronger agreement than there is in the Australian population at large. And the other things that we asked were how much do churchgoers trust others to tell them the truth of climate change, about climate change. So we listed some different people. So we said, how much do you trust scientists to tell you the truth about climate change? How about friends and family? How about church leaders, government, media, and so on? What we found across the board is that church people are much more trusting of others to tell them about climate change. So what does this point towards? Well, I think it points towards, although thoughts about whether climate change is happening and what the cause of it is are not that different from the population, the fact that there is a strong sense of responsibility and the fact that people trust others to tell them about these issues shows a generally stronger, if you like, moral sensibility, I suppose, among church people. And I guess we're strongly formed in the idea of moral engagement in a range of ways, and I think that points more and more towards churches as moral communities where there is potential to address these issues, and that potential can be more greatly realised the more strongly we engage with it. So that's important, an important finding, I think. Okay, what about eco-theological beliefs? So we asked people how much they agreed with these different statements, and we asked leaders, our senior clergy. I'm showing you the results here again for them and comparing it with church attenders. So we asked to indicate how much you agree or disagree that humans were created to rule over nature. So 3/4 of senior leaders agree with that, a bit over half of attenders. Humanity was created to manage the earth so that everything thrives. Again, strong agreement among leaders and attenders. This one is very interesting, this next one. We asked them how much they agreed or disagreed with the idea that God is present in nature. So a bit over 2/3 of senior leaders agreed with that, but almost all church attenders agreed with that. A very, very strong finding, don't you think? Then we asked creation has its own way of praising God. So we get more than half of leaders and attenders agreeing with that. Then we said it's important to care for the earth for the sake of human flourishing. 3/4 of church leaders agree with that statement. Over 80% of church attenders agreed. And our last one, which is the most important reason to care for the earth, is for the sake of human beings. So the previous statement, didn't say the most important reason, it just said we need to care for the earth for humans. But the next one, the statement was the most important reason to care for the earth is for the sake of human beings. So interesting, just under 4 in 10 senior leaders agreed with that, but over 60% of church attenders agreed with that. So it's interesting, I think, to see, you know, what's going on among clergy who you could argue are probably more formed in our traditions and people who are. And again, if we look at this by denomination, you can look even more fine detail at the sort of points of agreement between leaders and attenders and points of disagreement between leaders and attenders. Okay, to do a bit more work on these eco-theological beliefs, we created some scales. So what we did there is we averaged people's responses on 3 questions for each of these scales. So one scale, God in nature. I've already told you one of those statements, which is God is present in nature. The other 2 were all life is in some form a manifestation of God. And the third, I have experienced the presence of God when I've been in nature. So they form a scale. That means that people tend to agree or disagree with all those statements. They tend to co-vary together. And the average score on that, the God in nature scale, was over 4. So you can see it's the red bar there. So in other words, most people were somewhere between agree and strongly agree on average with that scale. Dominion, the other scale. So we average people's responses on those 3 statements. Humans were created to rule over the rest of nature. So a classic dominion statement there. And then we have others. Plants and animals exist primarily to be used by humans. Natural disasters and human-caused environmental degradation are signs of the end times. So that first dominion statement tended, again, to co-vary with those second 2 statements, and we've called that dominion. So on average, the score on that scale is pretty close to neutral. And the variation on that scale, which is shown by that black arrow, so the blue bar shows the average, the black arrows show the standard deviation or the variation. There's a lot more variability than there is on the God in nature scale. So that's important. The scales, they function independently. So that means that you might strongly affirm that God is in nature. That's independent of whether or not you assent to dominion theology. So you might be high or low on a dominion on the dominion scale. The other important thing to note there is that God in nature is positively related with other environmental measures, so with other environmental attitudes and actions, but that dominion is negatively related with other environmental measures. So it's negatively related to pro-environmental views and pro-environmental action. So they work in opposite ways in terms of their pattern of influence and views and actions. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of those particular scales. How did they vary then? By church tradition. So what this shows you is that the dominion scale, remember 3 is neutral, so 3 is the neutral point, 1 is strongly disagree, 5 is strongly agree. So what you see there is we get variation from Catholics followed by mainstream Protestants, and then our conservative Protestants, so we call them evangelical Protestants, which are Churches of Christ, Baptist, part of the Anglican Church, that's the Sydney Anglicans, and the Salvation Army, and Presbyterians, and our Pentecostals, and our other Protestants, small Protestant churches up the high end. Whereas God in nature, pretty uniformly strong agreement with that across the traditions. There's more variation across the traditions for dominion, less variation but strong agreement across the board for believing that God is in nature and experiencing God there.
Hello.
Okay. So
All right. I'm participating in a webinar at the moment. Can you call back after 3:30,
the good thing
please?
about asking all these questions in the one survey is you can have a look at are environmental actions related to broader environmental views? Are they related to demographics? And so on. Are they related to the denomination of a church that somebody is in? So just a quick summary of what we found there. We found that environmental actions are related to increasing age and higher level of education. People from mainstream Protestant denominations particularly are more pro-environmental, and those who say they have a moderate or liberal approach to faith likewise. So belief that Christians have an environmental responsibility is related to pro-environmental actions. So that's both civic actions, such as joining an environmental group or writing to a parliamentarian, and the consumer actions as well, taking those actions in the household to reduce energy and water use, for example. I probably don't have time to talk about the importance of bonding social capital, so we might move on from that, but if anyone's interested, we can talk about that at the end, and also bridging social capital. Again, we've talked about ecotheological beliefs, and that dominion works against environmentalism, but belief that God's presence in nature fosters environmentalism. We haven't tested in NCLS data the effect of political views, but we would expect that more conservative political views would be related to less pro-environmental action. We'd also expect that in congregations, where the congregation's more environmentally active, we might also see individuals to be more environmentally active as well. Okay, so in summary then, what we find is that there is congregational environmental engagement, and it's particularly encouraging in some areas. So a reasonable level of engagement in celebrating a day with an environmental theme, for example. But in other areas, there's certainly scope for a lot more. We see strong denominational variations in congregation activity and in clergy engagement, and we see conservative Protestants lagging consistently behind churches and clergy from other denominations. We have seen that there's an openness to creation care among churchgoers, but that it's a low priority issue compared to other issues that they think churches should be engaging with. We've also talked about how churches are moral communities, and churches can influence their attenders if they engage in this area. And to finish off as well, it's important to concentrate on immanence, the presence of God in nature. And the reason for that is because it's a strongly normative view, so people assent to the idea that God is present in nature, and because believing that is related to environmental concern and action. If we talk about that more and make those connections stronger connection between that belief and taking concrete action, then we can improve and enhance the way that our people are engaging with these issues. Dominion theology, much more difficult. There's a lot more to be done to reinterpret, if you like, Genesis 1. And because there's such greater variation in views in relation to dominion theology, I don't necessarily think it's the best place to start, especially in an ecumenical setting. Concentrating on something that we have in common, and the immanence of God here, is a great place to start, I think, in our ecumenical efforts. So I've been talking for a while there. So I'd like to hand it over for questions and discussion.
Thanks, Miriam. And of course, there's a lot more where this came from, isn't there, in the various papers that you've put out?
There is indeed. So I've sent to Clive, and hopefully Clive may have shared with you already. There's a whole range of papers that NCLS has produced that share these results.
Okay.
So it's really just a top-level view of them that I've shown you today.
There's some real surprises in there, and one that stood out for me, I think, was the relatively low percentage of people who regarded or who affirmed that the creation praises God. I mean, if you read the Psalms, it seems to me to be terribly obvious that the heavens are telling the glory of God and all the rest of it. However, questions, comments?
If you just speak a little louder, she should be able to hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you if you speak up. Like I was able to hear Clive then quite clearly.
Miriam, just Craig Batty from Indrapilla Uniting Church. This survey was...
Hi, Craig.
Thank you for your presentation too. And for this data, which is important, so we can sort of work out how we may be able to address some of the issues, I guess, that are raised. But particularly, this was in 2011. Do you feel that if the surveys were done today, that we may find different results? I mean, that's...
It's only been 3.5 years ago. I would think, well, compared with 2006 NCLS, there were a few questions asked in 2006. and that seemed to indicate an increase in environmental concern and engagement. So, you know, hopefully there's been, you know, that trend has continued and it has continued to increase. But broader surveys of the Australian population tend to show that environmental concern fluctuates depending on, you know, events, you know, world events and issues to do with the weather and political context and all the rest. So, you know, there might well be fluctuation in views too. So, you know, I would expect, as we know, certainly, you know, those of us here, we continue to do more engagement, we might hopefully see, you know, an improvement in the figures to the extent. But I guess I wouldn't be hugely sanguine that would be a huge change.
Thank you.
Well, one of the issues that stood out to me as I read over the material, the level of education that one has, it tends to be significant, and also in the counterintuitive area, where we often think that it's young people who are concerned about the environment. The reverse seems to emerge in the findings, that the older we get, the more concerned we are.
Yes, yeah, yes, and that shows up as well in multivariate analysis. So when you just look at age by itself in a church-going context, it's often confounded with denomination, because some of the denominations are much older than others. So, you know, the conservative Protestant denominations have a younger age profile, but less engaged with these issues, right? So you might see an age effect because of that, but when we control for that, we still see age. So, yeah, I know certainly in the environmental movement, there are a lot of older people engaged in that. Young people, but plenty of older people as well.
One possible variant in all of this could be geographical. For example, when it comes to conservative again, as opposed to the opposite of whatever conservative is, in Britain, for example, as I found out, most of the leading key Christian environmental groups identify as evangelical.
Yeah, that's right. And the way that we've grouped them here is according to, you know, what we know of the traditions in an Australian context. But any way that you try to break something down, you know, by denomination is going to be a messy category. But still, it does show us some general trends. In United States research, what's been found over the last 10 years is an increased environmental engagement among evangelical Protestants. So, you know, there's been a couple of papers produced recently that say, you know, what's happened in the last, you know, couple of decades that we've seen this greening of the church? Have we seen increased concern and action? And the answer was, well, actually, nobody's shifted that much in their views and actions except for the evangelical Protestants. They've gone from, you know, being quite low in concern and engagement to closing the gap on other denominations.
Miriam, my name's Anne. I'm from Angley What
Hi.
What I wonder about is, did you find any correlation between what the leaders of the church believed and what the congregations believed? And did you to find out in any way whether the leaders of the church were actually in their formation and education, whether they have been exposed to environmental care?
Yeah, so because our survey of church attenders is just a small percentage of everyone who took part in the NCLS, it's a random sample of the whole. It's hard to directly connect that to our leaders. If we had all the data for all the churches, we could look at the gap, if you like, or the similarity versus gap between our attenders and our leaders. We can connect up the data, though, especially between the actions going on in churches and leaders' environmental concerns and actions. We haven't done that to date, but it is something that we can do to look and see, you know, how closely do they match. I don't think, did I send around the fact sheet that was about voting? Did I send that around?
Yes.
Has anyone seen that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. There's another one that's about leaders' voting patterns. And the reason that I mention this is because it's about the similarity versus difference between attenders and leaders. So what you find is that on the whole, among churchgoers, church attenders and church leaders' voting patterns are similar. But then when you break it up by denomination, you find some fairly stark differences. So in the evangelical Protestant churches, many of them anyway, there's a similarity between leaders and attenders. In the Uniting Church, there's a big gap between leaders and attenders. Leaders much more likely to vote, I guess, for the progressive parties, if you want to call them that, and less likely to vote for the conservative parties, whereas the attenders, more likely to vote for the conservative parties. And then you go to the Pentecostals, and it's the reverse. So very, very strong conservative vote among Pentecostal leaders, less so among Pentecostal attenders. So, yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. It shows that in particular denominations, there's quite a distinction between the leaders and the attenders. I wouldn't be surprised to find similar things when we're looking at the environment, justice issues and so on, comparing leaders and attenders in those particular denominations to find that strong difference.
Miriam, hi, it's John Oxenford from Bribey Island Anglican Church here. Miriam, the 12% of churchgoers who are concerned about the environment, that's a little disappointing, not surprising. I'm just wondering how that 12% compares with what you've seen in other places, in the UK or Europe or the US.
Yeah, so I guess I don't have the figures in my head for where that kind of rates with other issues. This is an Australian survey question, but I guess, Clive's pretty aware of the European scene, probably more aware than me, really, of how highly this rates. Yeah. Clive, have you got any thoughts on that? Would you expect to find the same result, in the UK, for example, around where environment figures in the priorities?
I think as far as the churches are concerned, they would clearly be ahead of us. For example, when I was there in 2007 or whenever it was, the Anglican Church boasted an environmental advisor in every diocese in England, and some of those were people of great quality as well. The Methodist Church likewise was quite strong in this, and in part that related to I think the more compact geography of the UK and the relatively high population in relation to these smaller geographical size, and the presence of a number of key and Christian environmental groups. Eco Congregation being just one of them, the John Ray Initiative, and so on and so on. And I think all of that serves to put environmental issues more front and centre of the Christian consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Miriam, it's Peter Ryan from Catholic Justice and Peace Commission in Brisbane. I wanted to focus...
Hi, Peter.
How are you going?
Good.
I wanted to focus a bit on the question about climate change. I was astonished at the level of doubt expressed about anthropogenic causes and all that sort of stuff amongst churchgoers. This was 2011. I'm just wondering, I can't remember whether it was 2011 or 2012 when the federal Gillard government's Clean Energy Futures was passed in the Parliament. But I just wondered whether, if we can find that out, whether there's any correlation, because I can remember working within our parishes in that year in particular, when the public debate was heavily focused on climate change, that it was toxic within the churches, our churches, to be talking.
Toxic, did you say?
Toxic, yeah. It was.
Or topical.
TOXIC, toxic.
Poison.
It was.
Toxic, yeah.
It was poisonous. It was. You couldn't talk about the environment generally without somebody wanting to bring it around to engaging on your credentials in terms of knowledge about climate change.
Yes.
And it boiled.
This is the real challenge, isn't it? It's so politicised.
Yeah.
So politicised that it's very difficult for us to engage.
In that year in particular, it was highly politicised, and certainly our congregations, I thought, tended to line up on the issue along the lines that the public debate was lining up, where there was enormous hostility on the part of conservatives who didn't want any sort of climate change action of substance. They lined up their debates accordingly. They lined up with their particular exponents. So I just wondered whether, I'm hoping that there could be some change if that's the case subsequently.
It's hard to, I guess while ever the issues continue to be so heavily politicised, it continues to be very difficult for us. And again, to return to the voting issue, it's still, most of our people, vote for the conservative side of politics. And when we have such a politicisation of the issues, that it's no surprise that we see that when we talk about climate change. I guess that's where it's important, and one of the reasons we focus with NCLS on this issue of eco-theological beliefs as well is that you depoliticise it.
But even at that fundamental knowledge level, when you've got over a third who refuse to accept anthropogenesis arguments, that's really worrying for me, considering the amount of energy and resources that have been put in publicly to arguing the science.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, that question of trust, which I talked about before. Church people say they're a lot more trusting of scientists on climate change than the general public does. But then church people say they're a lot more trusting of, everyone we ask them about. So, it can help us, but, I don't think it's a scientific issue at its root. Yeah. Not for them.
Chris Dalton here, and thank you for your presentation.
Hi, Chris.
How have the stakeholders responded to this? Were they surprised at your findings? Have they said to you, our behaviour is going to change, we are now going to do X rather than Y? And how are your surveys being used? In other words, what's this leading to?
I think that's a key question. Where to from here? What are the learnings from this, in essence, and what are the implications for our strategies, our mission, the way in which we engage?
Yeah, so NCLS's role in this is to give a fairly straight down the line, I guess, presentation of the results without a huge amount of embellishment, and then it's up to people in the field to be invited to take those and use them in a useful way. And I'm certainly happy to talk about ideas that people might have about moving these forward. We have, like Clive said, a number of these papers and fact sheets now that show the results. But how we actually use them is another question. So really, these questions were developed to help people like you.
But have you had any particular striking responses from different denominations, or has somebody said to you, right, we are now going to change our theological training, or encourage people to promote mission more in eco-mission in their churches?
Nothing that strong, Chris. I know that Catholic Church is interested in looking at this, particularly at the moment, given the papal encyclical that's due out shortly. there's interest there in the results from that perspective, but I haven't had that concrete feedback about people, changing what they're doing in response. And I suppose my question would be, I raised the point about dominion theology versus talking about immanence, and that, I think there's a lot to be gained from concentrating on that. And, sometimes we think we haven't gone there because people are worried about, pantheism and nature worship and various things, but the reality is that on the ground, this is not an issue for people. People say, yes, I do affirm that, and I think that's a good place for us to start. And I'd be interested in your responses to that, to concentrate more on that aspect of things, whereas, we focus so much on Genesis 1,
Well, I've probably said this before, but certainly when it comes to dominion theology, and I think you do pick this up in one of the scripts, but it all depends on how dominion theology is defined. I mean, dominion theology, as outlined here, is not the dominion theology that I would argue for example, in my book. So
sure. I mean, this is a series of statements that we asked people to how strongly they agreed with them, and the point was that when we asked that question, where is it? When we asked that question, humans were created to rule over the rest of nature. People who tended to agree with that also tended to agree that plants and animals exist primarily to be used by humans, and tended to agree that natural disasters and human-caused environmental degradation are signs of the end times. So in the pews, they tend to cluster together. So regardless of the correctness of a certain dominion theology or different interpretations of dominion theology, that's how, in the pews, those questions tended to cluster together. So, yeah, and, obviously there's a lot of important work to be done here and in relation to dominion theology. But the issue that I was raising was that, when we talk about the immanence of God, there's a lot of fertile territory there, and especially among the traditions that haven't engaged as much with this area.
Miriam, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but it strikes me that the church generally has not really taken this material terribly seriously, hasn't really engaged with it to the degree that it deserves. And I wonder if there aren't some ways in some kind of national discussion even, rather than little groups like ours tossing thoughts around. It seems to me that we need to be communicating with each other across the country far more. Otherwise, in another 5 years' time, we're going to be pretty much in the same place where we are now. So there must be, and I'm not asking you necessarily to produce the magic answer out of your head, but there must be some key strategies or approaches that emerge out of this research.
No, that's Dr Miriam. If you have an answer, we would love to hear it too.
Yeah, so I've suggested one. I've suggested one already a couple of times.
Focus on the...
And that's the focus on the immanence of God.
Yeah, certainly.
Focus on the immanence of God.
Yeah. It's Paul Williams in Melbourne here. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Paul.
Oh, okay. I needed to check because my mic had been off. I was interested in the comment, Miriam, that you made about a concern about pantheism and nature worship as being a factor behind reluctance to engage in ecotheology and practice. The flip side of the connection between ecotheology and eco-spirituality might be an observance of the second commandment, that you can't really effectively love your neighbour unless you're also willing to protect their water supply and environmental conditions for their lives as well as your own. And I'm just wondering to what extent that can become a prevailing message.
Cool.
Yeah, there's been increased engagement in the churches around that, I think. I mean, certainly a lot of the climate change work that's being done, that's very much the message. Yep.
Certainly,
I would agree.
this is going to be a multi-pronged response. There's no one simple solution, but I think in wrapping this up, it seems that NCLS has provided us with a wealth of data here, and hopefully in the next survey we'll get more data.
Goodness, sorry.
It behoves us now the churches in general to begin to take this seriously, to talk with each other, to devise strategies and goals, to see to what extent we can change this. So I think we might...
Yes, and you know, I was just going to say as well, there's no reason why people can't incorporate, you know, things from this into other resources that they're doing, if you want to quote something out of these resources.
Yes.
And, you know, here in New South Wales, so Jason, John, now with my United Church hat on, Jason, John and I use those eco-theological statements. We ask people in you know, short eco-theology 2-hour session how much they agree or disagree with these sorts of statements, and then they get talking about them, and then we show them what the national results are, so they can be a teaching tool as well. There's lots of creative ways to integrate this kind of stuff in. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we might close at that point, Miriam.
Yeah.
Would you thank Miriam?
Thanks, Miriam.
I'm suggesting that we take a break for 5 minutes and then come back for an open-ended discussion about Is that all right?
Well, that's what I can see for now.
Thank you.
We'll be talking about
Doggy.
This is Rango.
Mingo.
He's been very good. He hasn't barked.
No.
Mike hasn't noticed.
So we'll just have a short break and then we'll stand up around and then we'll start again.
That's interesting. I was thinking. There's some companies that have been doing that too.
Yeah, we want to sell electricity. We don't want it. So there's an image which says, you know, if you cover a percentage of the Earth's surface, you need to cover essentially power all the Earth in solar. And it's, if you look at the Earth, it's a tiny little block. In Saudi Arabia, they could probably do that. They could probably cover a tiny little patch of their country with solar and sell it to the rest of the world. How you transport that energy?
Will we suspend the conversation, please?
Sorry.
Okay, we resume. Now, are we on the air?
Yes, we are. Miriam, you should be able to hear us.
Can you hear us, Miriam?
Has everyone got their breakfast cereals?
Okay.
But we can't hear you.
Oh, we can see you eating.
Yeah, sorry about that.
If your puppy wants to join us too, that's...
Okay.
Rango, hey. Maybe later.
Okay. Now, this part of the afternoon is completely unstructured. In broad terms, we're talking about mining and its implications. I'm suggesting that we hear from you, Miriam, initially in terms of what you know and some of the things that you've done. We can share, some of us here are more involved than others in this issue, but we can share in terms of what we've done, including a statement approved by Queensland Churches Together and a significant function we held in Toowoomba 18 months or so back. And then we can just engage how we can learn from each other and so forth. Is that all right?
Yep, okay. So the major things that Uniting Earth Ministry, so that's the Uniting Church of New South Wales ACT's environment project. It's been going since the start of 2014. The major things that Uniting Earth Ministry has done are produce a brochure, small brochure about coal seam gas, what is it and why does the church care, and produce a longer resource for congregations called Coal and Gas in Your Community, a mission study guide for congregations. And that is a 4-session discussion guide that uses the See, Judge, Act process to help churches engage with issues concerning mining in their local community and what might be their church's mission response to that. So we produced those 2 resources because we were asked to. There were churches on the ground that wanted more information and wanted support to try to engage with the issues, so we've produced them. We have connection with on the ground in Gloucester. So there's Coal Seam Gas Pilot Wells, AGL is a Coal Seam Gas Pilot project there. We've had connection as well on the ground in the Laird Forest on the Liverpool Plain. So yeah, we're in contact with people in churches that are engaging on a local level in those places. Our mission study guide was only released late last year, so we haven't evaluated take-up of that as yet, but we've distributed it through the rural churches, particularly in New South Wales. It's a Uniting Church resource that's kind of grounded, I guess, in Uniting Church thinking and so teaching and so on, but it can be adapted to other traditions as well, and certainly we use the See, Judge, Act method, which will be more familiar to Catholics probably than Uniting Church people. So yeah, people are certainly very welcome to use that resource. Yeah, they're the main things that we've done. We've connected it as well with Our Land, Our Water, Our Future campaign. Our synod a couple of years ago passed a resolution to ask the government to protect important areas of land, water and biodiversity from mining. So similar to the Our Land, Our Water, Our Future campaign goals actually. That came from the New England Northwest region of the state. That proposal came from them. We have for a while been engaged with the Go Fossil Free fossil fuel divestment campaign as well. But yeah, our Coal and Gas in Your Community mission study guide, that's that doesn't presume an outcome on the part of churches. It's very much trying to help churches engage in a process to try to explore the issues and how they might respond. It doesn't assume a particular response at the end. So it's a very open kind of a resource, although those of us who developed it might have our own views, but we didn't produce the resource for that purpose, not for a resource.
Okay. So, Miriam, to what extent are you engaged with other parts of the Christian Church?
Yeah, I mean through our New South Wales Eco Mission Working Group, which is connected with so National Council of Churches Eco Mission Network, as you at QSEN are connected as well. So we have a connection there, and certainly, you know, there have been groups of people from different Christian traditions visit the Laird Forest and the Maules Creek mine blockade up there. So yeah, we've organised 1 or 2 events concerning mining in Sydney as well, ecumenically. So we do have ecumenical engagement, but we're not doing a huge amount of concerted kind of work ecumenically in this area at the moment.
Miriam?
Yeah,
Got a couple of questions about your resource.
Yes, Chris.
I like how open-handed it is, and it encourages discussion without trying to be too polemic or push a particular point of view. And I get the impression it's orientated towards those congregations where there may be quite polarised views, and 50% of the congregation think there should be coal seam gas and 50% think there shouldn't be. So I'm really interested to know just what you've picked up on the grapevine of how the resource has gone down within communities, whether it has helped in reconciliation, whether it's helped in bringing a polarised congregation together.
Yeah, we certainly developed it with that in mind. Like, we're aware, on the ground the issues are so contentious, and I mean, Gloucester as is a congregation that we're very much hoping will use this resource in a concerted way, but I'm not sure how far down the track they are at this point. A couple of months ago they hadn't yet used it, so yeah, once again, a resource that's out there, but we're not sure of its take up at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah. Discouraging as that response might seem, yeah.
Miriam, this is Mary Tinney. I think I'm out of your range of vision, but that's all right.
Yeah, I can't see you, Mary. I can hear you.
I'm beside the lady in that one.
I can see your arm. Yeah, there it is.
I think after our visit to Toowoomba and our dialogue and our learning, we really went to learn and to listen and converse with people about the impact of mining, in that case on rural communities, and it's envisaged that we may do something similar in central Queensland area. I think one of the things that kind of preoccupies me is, what is an appropriate role for the church's conversation? Now, okay, the one of pastoral and reconciling divided communities comes up pretty immediately, but I guess, equally important for me is the capacity of the churches, particularly through their social justice arms, to really be clear about some principles, some values that really can guide you in taking action in the public arena. I don't know whether there's a question at the end of all of that. I think, it's kind of, what's your sense of the role of the churches, or maybe the multiple roles of the churches in engaging with the impact of mining?
Yeah, I think it's rare that a church as a church body does that on a local level. So there are individual Christian people who are engaging in the issues in a particular way, but I don't know, I haven't seen it much in New South Wales where a church as a corporate body will engage on the ground. The church's engagement in this stuff has been a more abstract kind of engagement, I guess. So statements in relation to climate change, even the churches work on divestment, you know, broad-based statements about protecting areas from mining and so on, but when it comes to the local level, I haven't seen a huge amount of that. And there might be, you know, you might be able to tell me more about what's happening in Queensland in this area. And I know, like, you know, your statement, you mentioned the Queensland Churches Together mining statement as one thing. The Toowoomba event, was that the Anglican Southeast Queensland organised bus trip?
No.
Is that what that was?
No, this was
something else. Okay.
I can give you an example from Tasmania, Sarah. It's Paul from Melbourne.
Yes, Paul.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I can give you an example of a local church identifying with environmental issues from Tasmania that happened there about 3 years ago when Scots Memorial Uniting held an event which we noticed that World Harmony Day and World Water Day were on consecutive days in the calendar. So we combined the themes of both in one event. We had a banner out the front of the church with, you know, love your neighbour as yourself and their water supply. But we had this event that coordinated all the themes of awareness around water supply as part of a World Harmony issue, because they do relate. Much of the conflict that's arising in the world is over water disputes. So, you know, there's a Christian responsibility to resolve community conflict more constructively. We felt it was an appropriate thing to make a statement about from a Christian perspective.
In terms of reconciliation, two points come to mind. When I was in South Australia, I think it was last year, I was in discussion with the moderator of the South Australian Church and with one of the officers of the Synod, and the comment that was made to me that we can't really get anything through the Synod on environmental matters because in so many towns in South Australia, half the congregation, as Chris said before, I think half the congregation wants mining and is dependent on mining, and the other half doesn't want a bar of it. And so this raises a very important, crucial issue of reconciliation. If that's the sweeping things under the carpet, how can that engage with the prophetic side of mission? And that relates to the second comment. David Queensland, who is qualified both in the mining area, has worked in mining and agriculture, and is now a United Church minister, I think has done some key work in this kind of area, and it would be interesting to have a further conversation with him. But these are very difficult issues. I'm not sure how they're going to be resolved.
Yeah, they are. They're so concrete. They're not. Yeah, they're not at the kind of broader general level that we often work.
And we do deal with them at all levels. Rob Brennan and Graceville. In our presbytery, for instance, we have one congregation that's been very actively involved and shut the gate and actually managed to. And we're cheering there last year because they managed to, the mine's exploration lease had expired. It's interesting because the next congregation over the valley, one of the key elders there is actually a supervisor in a mining company who's looking for ways to be socially involved in the community. And in my own congregation, I have one consulting mining engineer and one person who I suspect is at an environmental conference in Western Australia today,
because their expertise happens to be in coal seam gas at an academic level. And if you want to get upset, you just ask her about what the mining industry is doing with the technology. And if you want to get it further upset, you ask her about the greens. She doesn't like either because she doesn't think anybody's actually right with the issues. So, yeah, those are some of the practicalities that we're dealing with on a national level. We've got people at all levels. And
yeah.
Miriam, do you think there's an issue here, an elephant in the room almost, and that's the role of economics? There are so many assumptions made about the economics. It seems to me that there could be quite an argument for a significant informed economic debate. I mean, it's assumed that the economics of the country demand mining, and yet there's a counter argument. It seems to me that there are plenty of job opportunities of a different kind if we went in a more renewable direction.
Yeah, I think the work of the Australia Institute on Mining and Economics is really important here. Are people aware of that work? It talks about how a lot of the economic modelling around new mining projects is really overestimates their economic benefits. It's really important work.
Clive beat me.
For us to be aware of.
Clive beat me to the punch on that very question. When I look at this debate, your numbers say 12% of people, even in the church, are interested in environmental issues. So in this debate, you're not going to make a lot of headway, I don't think, pushing the importance of environmental issues because people just aren't concerned about them. They've said that in your survey. But economic issues are something that will rattle their cage. And if you look at some of these projects, they just don't stand up. And for instance, the coal issue in the Galilee Basin, supposedly this is going to bring 300 million tonnes of new coal onto the market. Well, there isn't 300 million tonnes of new demand that's going to be there. It's going to push 300 million tonnes off the market. And Australian coal miners are among the highest cost producers in the world. There's a debate to be made there that this will destroy more jobs than it could possibly create. And I think the Australian Institute's around the fringe of that argument. But those sort of issues need to be talked up more in this debate. And I think we'd get more traction in that debate if we focused on some of those areas and not just talk about climate change and the environment.
This is.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm cutting across here because I need to go. This is Mary again, and I'm not denigrating or anything, and I'd like the conversation to continue. But I was just listening to something yesterday from Yale University about some of the hopes about the encyclical, that it actually may break open the parameters of the conversation about climate change to really also put the moral dimension and the moral obligation on the table, and to kind of break it out of some of the kind of it being confined to economic and issues, and perhaps ignoring some of the social and some of the moral dimensions. So I guess it's it's a very multi-layered issue, and probably needs a very multi-layered conversation.
Can I just add to that? I agree 100% with what Mary says. I think we get trapped if we just focus on the economic argument, because it's about much, much more than economics. And while we talk about economics, we're never going to win, because you're appealing to people's pockets. It's much more about how do you care about the environment, etc. And if we just focus the argument on economics, it's pushing a very heavy load uphill.
I'm not sure about that. It seems to me that economics is bound to be part of the conversation, because this is a multifaceted thing, and it's not just. I mean, there's a case to be made that coal mining, for example, is not as economic a proposition as some imagine it to be. So I think we can argue the case economically in terms of renewables, but I think that this is a multifaceted thing. And Miriam, to pick up your point before about imminence, one of the points made in some of the ecotheology literature is that we need to learn to love creation. So that's a positive angle on one side. So we're arguing for at one level, we're arguing against at another level.
Well, I mean, I think that you know, the specifics of economic analysis is not necessarily our strong point as churches. Not to say that we don't engage with that, but you know, what we've tried to do with the guide for congregations, the discussion guide, is to encourage the congregation to ask questions about, you know, whose values and interests are affirmed. So, you know, affirmed or denied in what's happening in this place, and obviously need to understand that context and the economics and all these sorts of things to try and get to grips with that. But at a very fundamental level, it is about a question of values. And so if we're not speaking to that, then I think, you know, it is a, well, we need to move to broader value change, don't we? That's the whole point. So to engage on some level with those deeper values is really important in whatever we do, I think, to be very, very intentional and aware about that, even if we are engaging at a, you know, in a specific aspect to connect it with those deeper values.
I mean, if I could just add to that debate, the research that I've done, the only argument that's presented in the public sphere is about economics. We talked earlier about many, many different views of land, and we don't let these other views of land or creation, God's creation, intrude. We just use the economic utilitarianism of the land as the decider, and we need to broaden our horizons.
Yeah.
Yep, I would agree.
Have you had anything to do with the nice folk at Felton up there on the Darling Downs, Miriam?
No, haven't.
An interesting, it's sort of a non-theological discussion, so to speak, but Felton was faced with the prospect that some of the Darling Downs' most prospective or prosperous agricultural lands were going to be laid waste for a coal mine. So they rallied together and, among other things, they got a lot of community together, and out of that showed that the economic impact for Queensland and Australia would be far better if this land remained as agricultural land, and they won that argument. The coal miners have had their tent and gone away.
Good.
The landholders showed they would make a greater contribution than the coal mine.
That's good. Yeah, I guess one of the things that's clear in New South Wales, and it was, you know, would be in Queensland as well, I guess, is that where the industry doesn't yet have a hold, you know, the community is more able to mobilise, but where it does, you know, once it's starting, you know, then there's more and more fragmentation in the community around the issues. So, you know, on the Liverpool plain, in the places where the industry exists, yeah, community is very divided. In the places where it hasn't yet come in, you know, there's more opposition.
When we were preparing for the Toowoomba event, one of the papers that that emerged was a research project, a major research project, and funding was being sought for this. The project title was Understanding the Socio-Economic Impacts of Mineral Resources Development on People Who Are Vulnerable, Implications for Human Services Providers. And this was a partnership between University of Queensland, Uniting Church and Uniting Care Queensland, Centre Care, Churches of Christ in Queensland, Roman Catholic Diocese of Toowoomba, Angli Southern Queensland, Mercy Family Services, Lifeline Darling Downs, and Health and Community Services Workforce Council. I'm not sure where that got to, but that'll be interesting to follow up.
There was a report produced, wasn't there, by Uniting Care, maybe others too, that was like the first stage or something of that project, and then they applied for broader funding, but didn't get it.
That's right.
Yeah. That's my understanding, but maybe others know more than me on that one.
No, you're correct.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so unfortunately...
Sorry?
I was going to say, unfortunately, I don't think that's progressed.
No, it probably hasn't. But my understanding is that if funding wasn't sought, it was going to go ahead anyway in some shape or form.
Right.
So I might see if I can find out a bit about that. Just looking through a few other papers I've got, there's a presentation on social impact of mining, PowerPoints, David Ferguson's peacemaking as a response to mining impacts on communities, PowerPoint stuff. There's a mining task group environmental impact summary, which might be Anglican, I think, I'm not sure. And so it goes on. That coal seam gas, this is the Anglican one, so Social Responsibilities Committee.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff out there. I suppose the key question, we might draw this in fairly shortly, but what more can we do, or how can we change what we do? Should we be talking together more? Can we assist each other, encourage each other, challenge each other? Where are we at?
Yeah, I think one of the issues here in New South Wales is just the capacity to remain connected on the ground with the communities that are affected or engaging in one way or another. So there's kind of, I guess there's broader level discussions about broader projects we might do, and then there's those community connection questions. And I know in a lot of ways you're probably further down the path on all these areas in Queensland than we are in New South Wales probably. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it is helpful to talk more often.
Yeah, well,
but talk to what end, I suppose.
Can I just follow up on that? The question always going through my mind is, what is distinctive about the church input? Like other groups, other activist groups, where we can assemble data, we can do our ecological analysis or economic analysis. Loads of other people outside the church can do that. So what is distinctive about the church input? What is the Christian thing that we're bringing to bear? Otherwise, we're just like another group.
Well, I think one of the distinctive features is our starting point. What it is that motivates us. Certainly a focus on reconciliation and peacemaking is a distinctive Christian input. balancing that always with the prophetic element. But I think the most distinctive feature, although there are many outputs that are very, very similar indeed, it's what's driving us that is.
I think that's right, Clive. I think it's the reconciliation, peacemaking has got to be one of the things. One of the other ones is the centrality of the notion of why we're involved in the first place. That creation is undergoing redemption, that there is a cosmic aspect to the mission of Christ. The third one is that there's a pastoral component to all of the people who are involved. And that's why I raised that earlier about, I've been in situations where we have farmers who are fighting miners, we have miners who are trying to make a living, and the poor academic in the middle going, both of you got it wrong. The challenge then is actually how do we equip, we've got a role in actually equipping people involved in the debate to actually think more clearly about the issues. So that doesn't boil down to simply being economics. Just as in the environmental debate, it's not all about carbon tax. There's actually a purpose that we're actually trying to achieve in looking after nature. And to encourage people, I think something that both Chris and I have talked about in the last couple of years, giving them scientists working and professionals working in the field encouragement to actually enact their faith in their day-to-day work is actually incredibly valuable. And not anywhere else. So I think those are probably the three things which work together.
Yeah.
I think that churches as a network also bring interconnection between different places. So as simple as this is, at my church in South Sydney, we pray on a regular basis for the Gloucester congregation. So that's something just really small, but it's interconnecting people in different places, all as part of the church.
Yeah, well, I hope you're okay in there. It sounds pretty.
Sounds awful.
I think it's because Paul's typing. Paul?
Yeah?
Are you typing?
Yes.
Could you mute yourself?
Okay, yeah.
Unless you're going to talk. Huh? If you're going to say something, unmute yourself, but because the sound of your typing is just coming through the speaker
sorry.
and cutting across other people. That's all. So unmute when you want to say something. Okay. So nothing I said then came through.
No, we got it.
Is that right?
We got it.
You got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting, the moderator, New South Wales ACT moderator, visited the Liverpool Plain a couple of months ago, and community members really wanted to meet her. Were really interested that a leader in one of the churches was there. So from the broader community, there's an interest in what the church brings too. Yeah.
Because one of the issues we face from where we're sitting, as I put it, when it comes to budgets, the good news is we don't have any budget problems. The bad news is that we don't have any budget either. So anything that happens really happens because of the sheer commitment of people. That and really nothing else. Well, perhaps shall we close off at that point? And Miriam, hopefully we can find ways and means of communicating again sometime and keeping in touch, and hopefully we can continue to learn from you and what New South Wales has to offer, and we can hopefully contribute in some way to to what you're doing as well.
Yeah. Well, vice versa too. And look, I'd be really interested to hear more about what you did in Toowoomba and what you're, intending to do in, elsewhere in a future visit in Central Queensland. And there's a visit planned, a kind of retreat and awareness visit planned on the Liverpool Plain as well in September that, some folk might be interested in coming to too. So, I'm certainly interested to see the kinds of things that people are doing and, so as to learn from each other as well.
Well, let's endeavour to keep in touch. I think that's the key.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's commit to communicating more.
Do you have a newsletter that you send out, QSEN, or not really?
No, not really. We've got the
not really. Okay.
Website and
individual ones. Yeah.
Facebook,
which I get some of your individual ones. Yeah.
And it goes on the QCT website. Of course, the NCCA group, of which I'm also a member, has a newsletter. So we could go national on that as well.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a good way to keep in touch with what people are doing too. Like I've been getting Peters for years, for example.
Well, Miriam, thank you very much for what you've done. If I can get on camera. Thank you very much for what you've done. For the time you've given and for the insights, we very much appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. It's always a bit strange kind of speaking out into the ether, so yeah, but good to be able to connect with you, and wonderful to have this technology where we can do it.
Technology. A few years ago, I presented a paper to a conference in Finland. I'm watching a pre-recorded production that I'd done, and then at the same time they were watching it over there in Finland, and then I was able to engage with that audience from the other side of the world. Yeah. When it works, technology is brilliant. Yeah. Thanks again, Miriam.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Miriam, and thanks, Paul. And I'll just bring the GoToMeeting to an end. See you later.
Thanks, Neil. Bye.
Bye.